Conor lost the job he was great at when a machine replaced him. What he found in the work that came after, farming, deliveries, stonework, was that being safe from my eye wasn't the problem now. Knowing what to do with his life was. Let's step into the story.
People don't call customer service when they're happy. By the time someone reached Conor Walsh, they were usually already frustrated, sometimes furious, and somehow, 6 years running, Conor could take that call and turn it around. Not with a script, with a kind of patience most people don't have and can't sustain for long. And he had it call after call, year after year, without it wearing him down. The system that replaced him couldn't do that. What it could do is answer the call in under a second and never once cost the company a sick day. That was the metric that mattered to people who signed off on the decision. Connor's actual skill, the thing almost nobody can do well or for long, didn't show up on their spreadsheet. It just went unemployed. The redundancy check covered 6 weeks, maybe 8 if he was careful. The rent on the flat didn't care how careful he was. He sat with the numbers a long while before he let himself believe them. There was no version of this where he kept the place past the month's end. He gave notice, boxed the flat up in a weekend that felt much longer than a weekend, books in crates, the good knives wrapped in tea towels, the bed frame taken apart with an Allen wrench he then taped to the back of the headboard. A friend with a van helped to haul most of it to a storage unit on the edge of the city. He stood in front of his unit after the door rattled down and locked, a whole flat's worth of life reduced to a rectangle he'd pay €40 a month to keep in the dark. What he still needed fit into a suitcase which he took with him along with his laptop and his good boots. A few weeks, he told his mother, just until I sort myself out. The bus carried him west, past towns that got smaller and hills that got greener, until the fields were stitched together with stone walls and the light came in low and soft through the windows. He had nowhere else that wouldn't cost him rent he no longer had. Maeve had the kettle on before he'd got his boots off. So, she said, setting the 2 mugs down, what's the plan? Still figuring it out. He turned his mug a quarter turn on the table, then another. Stay as long as you need, Maeve said, and meant it. There's no rent here, just do something with yourself, Con. Doesn't have to be the answer, just something. He said he would. Care went into the unpacking that the task hardly deserved. Shirts folded, refolded, sorted by color, and then, halfway through, left undone while he went outside instead. The case stayed like that for a week. Half a life arranged, half still in the bag. Mornings he walked. Out the gate, down the lane, no destination, just motion. The lane between 2 high hedges, stone walls beneath them soft with moss. Wild along the base of the hedge grew a grass unlike the neat pasture stuff beyond. Loose-headed, drooping, each seed hung on its own long thread, swaying, though there was no real wind to speak of. He didn't know its name. He only noticed it the way you notice something waiting on the same thing you are. Every morning, exactly as far as the bend, where the lane dipped toward a stream and the trees thickened into something closer to a wood, every morning at the bend he turned around. Within a fortnight, he'd taken on relief milking of a neighbor dairy farmer, Murphy Egan. Steady with the animals, up without complaint at 4:30. Murphy offered him a permanent position after a second week. Conor did the sum that night. Even the best year of it, full-time, wouldn't touch what he'd once earned behind a headset. It would keep him fed. It wouldn't help rebuild anything. He kept coming for the milkings only and left the offer where it sat. The warehouse shifts went the same way. Hours he was good at, a supervisor who liked him and offered more than he took, roster texts he stopped answering after 3 good weeks. It was the evening delivery driving that stuck in the end because it never asked him to promise anything past the evening he was already in. He was good with the customers there, too. Chatty at the doorstep, tipped, remembered, asked for by name on the app, the way he'd once been asked for on the phone. None of it added up to a life. All of it kept him solvent enough to keep not deciding. Some nights he sat with a course page open, a certificate in IT support, evenings and weekends, the kind of thing that might put him back somewhere with a desk and a salary that meant something, and a job an algorithm couldn't lift out from under him quite so easily. He read the module list twice. He didn't book it. Once he dialed the admissions line in Galway about the engineering degree he dropped at 20. He hung up on the second ring before anyone answered and told himself it was a bad line. Down past the second gate, their neighbor Tom Hessian mended his walls himself, a little at a time. Conor wandered down one afternoon and stayed 3 hours, hauling stone, learning the knack of setting one flat rock against the give of another. "You've a feel for it," Tom said. "Could a fellow make a living at this? Properly, I mean?" "Some do. Takes years to get known for it. No machine's ever going to learn hands, though. You'll want to be sure first." "I'm not sure of anything these days," Conor said, and left it there. "Any word on what's next?" their mother, tinny through the speaker. "There's talk of Dublin, maybe." He hadn't looked at a single listing. It was the easiest thing to say because it asked nothing of him. Maeve, drying a pot at the sink, said nothing, but Conor saw her doing the sum all the same. Their late father's old bike sat behind the house, chain seized, back wheel buckled. In the gaps between one job and the next, Conor took it apart with real quiet skill, then left it leaning against the shed wall, half a machine, next to some spare parts he had dug out of a shed. He walked away to answer a text to report for a shift the next town over. Tom asked him back to finish the top field wall on a Thursday. A better paying shift came up for that day instead. Conor told himself he'd go after. He didn't. He told himself the next day. He didn't do that either. One morning he walked past the bend that had always been his turning around point. The lane gave way to old trees, light falling through in broken pieces, the same drooping grass grown thick there too, taller than his waist, arching under its own soft weight. He stopped breathing in the feeling of that shifting light and the grass moving faintly around him, though he still couldn't feel any wind. The lane met the stream at a row of flat stepping stones. He looked a long while at the far bank, which looked, if he was honest, exactly like the near one. He did not cross. He turned around and walked home. Later, over the half-built bike, wrench in hand, not working, he thought about saying it to Maeve plainly, that he had 4 doors half open and couldn't say why he wouldn't walk through any one of them, only that choosing felt like closing the other 3, and none of them felt certain enough to be worth that. He got as far as the back door, changed his mind, and said nothing. It was Tom who asked again plainly, could Conor give him a hand finishing the last stretch of wall by the top field? Conor said he would. This time he came back the next day, and the day after. They worked it stone by stone, saying little. The last gap was narrow. One stone would close it. He turned it over twice, testing its face against the gap. He set it. It held. Tom stepped back, wiped his hands on his trousers, and said, "There." From Tom, that was a great deal. Conor stood looking at the finished stretch, not the whole boundary, not even the whole field's worth, but one length of it, done, start to finish, by his own hands, for no wage at all. It was such a small thing. It didn't feel small. Back at the shed, he picked the bike up again. Wheel true, bolts tightened, under an hour, once he actually sat down to it. He stood back after, looking at it whole, and felt something settle that had nothing to do with the bike at all. Out for his walk early the next morning, same gate, same lane, same hedgerow swaying at the base of the stones, he reached the bend and kept walking. The light fell the same soft, broken way it always had, the grass arching all around him, seed heads hung on their long, slender threads. He reached out and let his palm brush along the top of it. At the stepping stones, he didn't pause. He crossed. The far bank looked up close, almost exactly like the near one, except that he was standing on it. He found Tom in the yard that evening and asked him properly this time. Not, could a fella make a living at it, but would Tom teach him, take him on, show him what it took to be worth hiring, even if it took years, even if the driving and the milking had to keep him fed while he learned. Tom looked at him a moment. You sure now? No, Conor said, but I'd like to find out. That'll do, Tom said. And it would. The grass in Conor's story, hairy brome, or wild oat, Latin name, Bromus ramosus, grows along the hedgerows and the shaded edges of Irish and British lanes. It is tall, sometimes to shoulder height, and arches under the weight of its own seed heads, each one hung on its own long slender thread, so that in the slightest breeze every seed sways in its own direction. Stand beside it and you feel it before you name it, a plant that seems to be considering many possibilities at once. It is also one of the 38 flower essences developed by Dr. Edward Batch in the 1930s, a British physician who believed that our emotional states could be gently supported by the energetic patterns of flowers. Batch placed wild oat among the remedies for uncertainty, but it is a particular kind of uncertainty. Not the loss of faith of gorse, not the swinging between two clear options of scleranthus, not the doubting of one's own judgment of serrato. Wild oat is for the person of real gifts who cannot find the shape of their life, someone with ability enough for several paths and no way of knowing which one is theirs. It is the strange discomfort of being competent at too many things and called toward none of them clearly enough to commit, and the quiet suspicion underneath that the moment you choose one, you will lose the others. People in the wild oat state often keep busy. They keep moving. They are frequently good company, capable, well-liked, asked for by name. But they carry privately a hum of drift, a sense that their real life has not quite begun, and they cannot say why. This is different from laziness, and different from indecision as a character flaw. It is more like a plant with many strong stems and no clear direction to lean. And that drifting space is where wild oat offers its support. Batch described the change the remedy supports not as pushing someone into a decision, but as helping them hear the calling that was there all along, so that the path, when they see it, is recognized rather than chosen. The dissatisfaction quiets. The gifts begin to gather themselves toward one direction. Often, nothing dramatic happens. The person is simply finishing what they start, and the finishing turns out to have been the whole thing. The wild oat plant mirrors this with an almost uncanny precision. Its seed heads hang each on their own long thread, pointing in every direction, but the plant itself is one plant, rooted, singular, entirely certain of what it is. The many possibilities are held from one center, and the seeds, for all their swaying, only grow where they land. They do not become the next plant while still hanging in the air. Commitment to the ground is what turns possibility into anything at all. If the grass in this story felt like a mirror to you, if you have real gifts and cannot find your shape, if you keep several doors half open because closing any one of them feels like a loss you cannot justify, if you are competent and busy, yet still quietly drifting, wild oat may be worth sitting with. It is taken as a flower essence in the usual way, a few drops in water several times a day over several weeks. It works gently and slowly, more like a season than a decision. If you feel called to bring this remedy into your life, wild oat flower essence is easy to find. It is prepared by Batch Original Flower Remedies and can be found online in local health food stores, pharmacies, or through a dedicated flower essence practitioner. And if you find Wild Oat describes you, I want you to know that this story was made with a great deal of respect for the gifts you carry and for the courage it takes to finally set them down in one place.